Welcome to part 2 of We Need a New Middle Class Dream. And this is section 2, where we're going to talk about food, including fast food. So this is one of those topics that people have got strong thoughts and feelings about. But if we have any chance of tackling the crises we face, the multiple crises we face, we're going to have to make some radical changes. And we all need to be aware of them and be willing and open. We're not going to get everyone on board, and I don't think we should worry about the people who just aren't ready to join the journey here, because we can waste a lot of time getting angry and frustrated with people. We've just got to work out what we can do and get to work. All right, so let's talk about food and fast food. Did you have access to lobster when you grew up? My childhood was in the 70s and 80s in Australia, and I can honestly say I never had lobster on my plate. As I've wandered the world since then, all over the world, lobster is everywhere. But of course, it's not exactly a sustainable resource, is it? So how is lobster everywhere? And that's the challenge we face. Middle-class people eat more meat, we eat more seafood, we eat more of everything. Can 3.8 billion people eat the same way a smaller middle class were able to eat before the massive explosion in consumer spending? And what is the cost? I mean, can we ensure a livable planet on the path we're on? I'd suggest no, we cannot. So we need to change it. When we look back at the growth our leaders knew was coming, and they did know, it's hard not to ask the question, did anyone ever ask or think about how we could feed 3.8 billion middle-class people who would naturally have higher expectations when it came to their diet and their choices, let alone the total 8.1 billion population, which is, of course, continuously growing? Didn't anyone ever go, wait a minute, we might need to reconsider our diets, which isn't a bad idea anyway, but we can't feed all the new middle-class people the same way the West has been eating for decades. That would be suicidal. But once again, it appears that no one really thought of that. Of course, it's not just lobsters. It's the same for prawns, tuna, salmon, crab, and on we could go. We're emptying the oceans and rivers of fish and crustaceans at such a rapid rate, which is depleting the ocean of oxygen and increasing heat extremes. Perhaps none of us will be able to eat these delicacies anymore based on what is happening in our waterways. The idea that 3.8 billion people might want to eat lobster, did anyone ever think about that? Did anyone think about 3.8 billion people eating red meat, white meat, drinking milk, eating cheese, or the food packaging and its impact? It appears that no one really thought about that. So let's dig into the data, and we're going to start in the water. Of the overall production of aquatic animals, over 157 million tonnes, which is 89%, is used for human consumption. The remaining 20 million tonnes are destined for non-food uses. That's mainly to produce fish meal and fish oil. So here you go. That's 840% growth in both fisheries and aquaculture since the 1950s. But you can really see the explosion happening, especially from the mid-90s there. No wonder we're running out of fish in the oceans and rivers. Not to mention krill, whale food, is being ripped out of the oceans at a massive rate. And these tiny krill are awesome at sequestering carbon, so they are much more valuable if we leave them in the ocean. Here's the destination that chickens are taking, the most consumed meat in the world by a long shot, and that's 800% growth. And you can see the prediction for where it's going into the future. In part 1 of We Need a New Middle Class Dream, I showed you a graphic demonstrating that 60% of mammal biomass are livestock, so farm animals and pets, 36% are humans, and only 4% are wild animals. we need to massively increase the population of wild animals. It's so important. In this New Guardian graphic, it takes it one step further. 70% of birds are chicken or other poultry, and only 30% are wild birds. With bird flu, urbanisation, heat extremes, and a lot of other things that are going on in our environment, our wild bird friends are really at a great risk of ecosystem collapse and extinction. We have to take this seriously and support any action that is happening globally, or if action isn't happening, we need to make sure it starts. Overall, global meat demand isn't calming down anytime soon, according to this prediction. But the really important point is in this comment. Due to population growth and more middle-class people who can afford to spend more on things like meat, we need to increase global food production by more than 40% by 2030 and 70% by 2050. And this is based on 2005 to 2007 levels. However, there's a huge problem with this. And I think this is a very honest question we need to be asking ourselves. With 60% of the world's agricultural land currently used for animal agriculture, and we're all aware of the resulting deforestation, emissions, and phosphorus pollution flowing into our rivers and oceans because of it, right? So it's already causing massive issues, and we literally have no space left for more unless we just cut down the rest of the forests. So does anyone have any idea how it can grow by 70% based on what we're doing right now? We're not even really hearing stuff like this being discussed, not in the halls of power. This is the sort of stuff that really, really concerns me, and it should concern all of us. It's like our leaders continue to just fly blind or just pretend that this isn't happening. But food insecurity is increasing all over the world, and we need to get a handle of it. Here's how soybeans are growing. And in case you didn't know, 70 to 80% of soybeans grown are used for animal feed, which is shocking when you consider the amount of land that is cleared for this. So it's not, the animals don't just take up the land that they're on. There's also this other land that's used to grow their food. So it's a massive contribution. And also that we can eat more meat. But it is destroying the foundation of our ability to live on this planet. Not only that, but the impact on nature as a monocrop and on humans living near these crops. It's causing terrible diseases and sicknesses in humans, which of course is also happening to all life in that environment. So it's not adding to human health or the health of the natural world. So here's Exhibit A. Soy is just so bad for many reasons, but here's one. It's been linked to increased rates of childhood leukemia in Brazil. Let's move on to fast food. And we're all aware that it's bad for us. There's no one that would say otherwise, but it's certainly not stopping its growth. But beyond the impact it has on our health, the impact of fast food is staggering on our environment right across the board. From the waste produced, especially as it's typically takeaway, massive deforestation, phosphorus runoffs into our lands and rivers, which are causing mass die-offs and ecosystems to collapse, animal suffering, the impact of the chemicals in the food on us and the environment as it's flushed out through our waste, displacing Indigenous communities, and so much more. When it comes to fast food, it obviously makes sense to focus on the big one, McDonald's. Now, I know a lot of people love McDonald's. So I remember when McDonald's first came to where I grew up in the 80s, and it was so exciting. I used to race bicycles, and we used to all go there for our pre and post-race munchies. But very quickly, I sort of started to realize that it was making my skin itchy. So I realized that it wasn't good for me, and therefore I've never really gotten into it. But I know a lot of people do love it. You know, one of my brothers, he loves it. And I don't think I could ever stop him from eating it. So to give you a sense of scale, and it's actually hard to find a lot of data or data that sort of makes sense. So, but to give you a sense, there are more than 40,000 McDonald's locations worldwide, And since the pandemic, we're seeing McDonald's coming strong again and building new stores. Globally, it serves more than 69 million people daily. It operates in 118 countries and territories, and it earned $23.18 billion in global revenue in 2022. But what I'm always interested in is growth, and McDonald's only wants to grow, as you can see from these headlines, especially in Asia Pacific, where the majority of the new middle class are located. You know, I've lived in Asia for the last 20 years and I've seen this growth happen in real terms. And I know that people in this region love it. It's cheap, it's easy, it's accessible, you can get it on the go, but it's not a good thing for people's health and it's not a good thing for our environment either. Here's McDonald's growth from 1994 to 2020. And even though it's been a bumpy ride, I definitely would recommend looking into McDonald's story as a business. It's quite perplexing, but anyway, even with that big dip, it's still experienced 138% growth since 1994. And if you just remember, 50% is double. In real terms, McDonald's sells a staggering 2 billion burgers for the entire year. And where does all that meat come from? Animal agriculture is responsible for so much destruction. Also, we can have a cheap burger, but it's not just food. And I'll discuss this in the fashion section, which I'm going to do next. I also believe that this is how we're getting all of those lovely new Louis Vuitton bags made, because the leather's got to come from somewhere, right? But even though McDonald's failed when it introduced its plant-based burgers, if it really wants to be a business moving into the future, only radical action is going to make any difference. So it's time for the business to completely transform its entire offerings and supply chain to be in alignment with a healthy planet. There is no question that fast food is a disaster for all of us, but it's also a disaster for the environment. And maybe it's one of those industries that just needs to go. I know, not popular, right? Until 1994, McDonald's had a tagline for its burger sales, over 99 billion sold, but it doesn't update this number anymore. And what was really interesting when I went looking for the information is how many people are looking for the answer to this question. So Food XP states that McDonald's sells about 6.48 million burgers each day worldwide. And as I said earlier, this comes to a staggering number of 2 billion burgers for the entire year. Doing the math, since 1994, we could be at 160 billion burgers today. But I don't know, that doesn't sound right. It sounds too small since 1994, especially when you look at the sales. And of course, it doesn't include all of the other food it sells. Of course, it's not just McDonald's. There are many, many fast food chains around the world. And some of the biggest ones are coming out of Asia at the moment. But here's the global fast food market insights forecast to 2032, which really does feel very conservative to me. So it was valued at 980 billion in 2022, and it's expected to reach nearly 1.584 billion by 2032, with Asia Pacific expected to be the fastest growing market during this forecast period. And that's growth of 61%, so more than double. And like I said, I still think that this is conservative. So what are our options? What do we need to be considering? Whether it's normal food or fast food, here's some ideas. And again, I want to remind you, I'm just sharing my ideas, and I'm also attempting to capture the scale of the change that is required if we have any chance of turning things around. So number one, which might surprise people that this is number one, the first and most important issue we must address is we have to take care of our farmers, especially the family-owned smaller farms. We are seeing global farmers' protests, which is not just happening in Europe. India's experiencing farmers' protests, as well as increasing suicide rates amongst farmers because of crop failures, and they're going into such debt they think there's no other way out. But the other issue, of course, is the far right are jumping into these protests, which is a huge concern. because if the far right ends up leading us, then I personally think everything's over anyway. So we've got to get on top of this. But I think the real concern here is we need to support local farmers, because the big industrial farms, they're going to be okay. Well, down the track, when nature continues to collapse and makes farming harder, even these big businesses will fail. And then what do we have left? We can't just rely on that. We need a much better approach, and we've got to bring the farmers into the fold when decisions are being made, and we have to work together with our farming community. The vast majority of farmers want to do the right thing, even if that is not being reflected in the media right now, but they are suffering enormously due to the impact of weather extremes. Our media is full of headlines discussing total crop failures, and this is going to get worse. So how do we help them? Because ultimately, we will be helping ourselves. We need farmers. We can never forget that. Number 2, what are our future plans for food? Large areas across the world, let's just take Spain as an example, it's becoming desertified. So for the food grown in this area, what are we going to do? What plans do we have in place to move farms to areas where growing essential crops will be viable into the future? And what shouldn't we be growing? Because it's unnecessary to provide a balanced diet, and we need to prioritize what the world's citizens needs versus growing luxuries for the very wealthy. One example in Spain again, on a UNESCO World Heritage Site, there was an abundant ecosystem, but strawberry farmers drained the lake dry and completely destroyed the ecosystem, all for profit. When will we have laws to stop this? When will we have the sense to stop it? It's crazy what we're doing. All right, number 3, we really need to be looking to end the fast food industry. And I get it, it's hard. Like I said, I have family members who are addicted to fast food, and I know this is very unpopular with them, and it will be with many, many others. But based on the severity of the crisis we are in, something has to give, and that something needs to be massive so we can make an actual difference. So can fast food go plant-based? Yes, McDonald's failed. But perhaps we need the decision taken away from us. The impact of fast food on our environment and on ourselves is too massive to ignore, and it's time for radical changes. So I'm sorry if you don't like that as a suggestion. It's just my suggestions. Let's see if anyone even hears them, right? 4, seafood. Our oceans are being emptied. We are all aware of the mega trawlers across our oceans with massive nets capturing everything in its path. We need to stop this. Deep sea mining too. Please get involved in the protests against this. It's so bad. Because we need to give life in the sea a chance to bounce back. Because if we don't act radically here, we will face a dead ocean, and a dead ocean means a dead planet. So here's an idea. Why don't the richest people in the world buy up all the mega trawlers, get them out of the ocean, which would have the double benefit of saving people from slavery. And then with those ships, we can pull them apart and use those materials to build climate refugee cities. Solution, right? The fishermen can either be part of this building process, or they can join the ocean cleanup if they can't bear not being out in the ocean. We need many hands out there cleaning that up. Another potential is to train the fishermen in plant-based seafood and really get that industry going. So are there any billionaires out there who can come together and solve this? Just an idea like all I'm sharing. But this is a critical area that we need to address. We need to make massive progress here. And the place to start is with the mega trawlers. Our governments don't seem able to tackle this global problem, and it is a massive global issue. The local fishing boats, sure, we can keep them going, but the mega trawlers with those huge nets who are just taking all the life in their path, they need to go. And it's not happening, and it needs to happen. Our oceans are in such a dire state now. Right. 5, seafood farming. It's horrendous. Our fish are poisoned. A recent report out of Tasmania showed wild fish caught near a salmon farm was stuffed full of antibiotics at a much higher level than is acceptable for human consumption. Fish farming is a disaster, and the industry is not just using antibiotics, but formaldehyde too, which causes cancer. In Norway, which has been in the spotlight recently, it's home to the world's largest salmon producers, and there's news around how the fish farms are polluting its pristine fjords and neglecting fish welfare. You want to eat that? And if that's not enough, seafood producers in Norway are driving up to 4 million people in West Africa towards food insecurity and nutrient deprivation. Essentially, nearly 2 million tonnes of wild fish are being extracted annually from major farmed fish and aquafeed producers. And most of these fish are being turned into fish oil and meal, which is a key feed ingredient for aquaculture and livestock. We must address this. When something is happening in one country or region, but it is having a disastrous effect on another country or region somewhere else in the world, we need to say a very big no. If we don't address inequality at the same time as addressing the climate and biodiversity threat, we are not going to solve it. Besides, Norway may need to stop its fishing industry full stop because of the immense amount of microplastics in its waters. Basically, it's where it is means that the microplastics are coming there in enormous quantities. So the actual industry might have to collapse no matter what. But why would we accept eating any of it, knowing that fish across the world are full of plastics and chemicals? The bigger fish, the worse it is. All right, let's move on to meat. It's a major issue, especially red meat. We know that red meat is a disaster for our environment, no matter how it's farmed. We need to rapidly scale animal agriculture down, especially the animals that provide us with red meat. Animal agriculture uses 83% of global farmland, but only produces 18% of the world's calories. We should be flipping that around. The food that we grow should be providing the most amount of calories so that we can feed everyone in the world. The people who are suffering from famine in this world at the moment, they do not need to be suffering. That's a choice. It's a choice we're making. And surely it's time we step up and change the choices that we make so that we can take care of our fellow neighbors and our fellow humans, right? But that's why it's critical that we push towards a plant-based diet and a plant-based food system, which would require growing fewer crops, and it would free up land that could be used to grow other food crops, which would also sequester carbon or foster biodiversity. And we need all of that happening at the same time. Global meat and dairy production uses about 40 million square kilometres of land, or approximately 38.5% of the world's habitable surface area. We need to scale it all down. For me, this one is a no-brainer. Number 7, the waste from food. When it comes to food, food waste accounts for around 1/4 of greenhouse gas emissions, which is 6% of total global emissions. That's huge. It's a shocking number, and we all need to massively reduce food waste because 1/3 of all food for human consumption in the world is lost or wasted. That is 1.3 billion tonnes of food suitable for human consumption and 1.6 billion tonnes of so-called primary product equivalents are lost or wasted. More than 800 million people suffer from hunger and undernourishment. All these people could be fed by less than 1/4 of the food lost or wasted in the US or Europe. And if we can get control of food waste, we can also feed all of the other people yet to be born. Food is lost in every step of the food life cycle, from agricultural production, post-harvest, handling and storage, processing, distribution, consumption, and of course, its end of life. We need to get our food out of the rubbish bins and make sure everything organic is composted. Because when food goes into landfills, it breaks down and releases a significant portion of human-made greenhouse gases. Up to 22% of landfill waste is food and organic waste, and methane beats carbon dioxide. Methane is about 28 times more powerful than carbon dioxide at creating warming over a 100-year timescale, And over a 20-year timescale, it's over 80 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. There is natural methane, which we obviously can't do much about, but there is also human-caused methane. We need to get a handle on the latter. Please start composting. If you live in an apartment building, set up a composting unit so everyone can come and compost their waste. All right, 8. And I'm sure there's plenty of other things that other people could add here, but these are the 8 that I came up with. The chemicals in our food. The research is coming out more and more, illustrating the impact of chemicals in our food, not just on humans, but on all life. From endocrine disruptors, which interferes with our sex hormones and is having a major impact on all living beings, including male fertility, developmental delays, so ADHD, autism, and things like that are tied to it, to known carcinogens. We are in a state of crisis. So to give you a feel, here are the top 12 from ewg.org, or the dirty dozen chemicals in our food system. So number 1 is nitrates and nitrites. Nitrates and nitrites are preservatives used in cured meat and have been linked to stomach cancer, esophageal cancer, and possibly brain and thyroid cancers. Potassium bromate is a possible human carcinogen that is added to flour used in packaged baked goods. Don't buy bread in the supermarket aisles. You can smell the chemicals as you walk down the aisles, trust me. I made an active choice not to buy bread with chemicals in it a long time ago. Propylparaben. It's a preservative used in pastries and some tortillas. It causes developmental and reproductive harm. So if you want to have a baby, if you're trying to get pregnant, or if you are pregnant, these are one of the ones you should definitely avoid. BHA, which is in potato chips, and I'm not going to even try and say these words. There's a couple of them. But anyway, it's a preservative used in cured meats and other foods. Multiple sources have identified it as a possible human carcinogen. BHT, another one that's used in cereals. So it's found not just in cereals, but in other foods. It's a chemical cousin of BHA and is a possible human carcinogen. TBHQ is a preservative used in things like Pop-Tarts, which I have never had, along with other processed foods. It may harm the immune system and weaken the effectiveness of vaccines. So in this COVID world, that's probably an important one to pay attention to. Titanium dioxide, so in our candies, sweets, and lollies, using all the different terminology from different parts of the world. It's a color additive used mostly in candy, and it is thought that it could damage DNA. So again, if you're pregnant, one to avoid. Brominated vegetable oil, BVO, is used to stabilize citrus flavors in sodas and fruity drinks. It can cause neurological harm. So maybe one of those drinks to stay away from. Forever chemicals, or PFAS, which I think is the way it's said. PFAS are used in food packaging and are known to leach into the food itself. They increase the risk of cancer and damage the immune and reproductive systems, among many other health harms. Artificial colors, again, in candy, sweets, and lollies. Synthetic food dye can be found in many types of food and beverages. They can affect development and cause behavioral difficulties in children. There are 7 that are considered extremely concerning: red 3, red 40, yellow 5, yellow 6, blue 1, blue 2, and green 3. If you'd like me to share the article, reach out and I'll send it to you. But really, keep an eye on what's in your food. Artificial sweeteners that I've never liked can affect the hormones that regulate metabolism and have a negative effect on weight control. And finally, heavy metals. And unfortunately, many baby foods contain dangerous levels of heavy metals, including mercury, lead, cadmium, and arsenic. Exposure can slow growth and development, increase cancer risk, and lead to behavioral and learning difficulties. Most metals get into food through water and soil pollution. So, this is obviously a big concern. I'd recommend that we all only buy organic fruit and vegetable and make our baby food at home. But of course, that's not a realistic expectation for the vast majority of people in this world. So the businesses providing these products obviously need to make sure that this does not continue. These are our babies that are being poisoned with these terrible heavy metals. If we really want to take all of this very, very seriously, it's time to prioritize maternal health globally. We need to make sure that pregnant women have access to a clean and novel entity-free diet. And this is not just about keeping them healthy, but it's also about ensuring our future generations are healthy and fertile, because fertility is being impacted by this, especially in males. We also have to be very clear on what the impacts are, because as one example, interfering with sex hormones is a major alarm card. Recently, there's been a massive swing against the LGBTQIA+ community, and it just makes me sick. It's very, very dangerous too. Basically, what the scientists are now starting to show is that it is our own environment interfering with our sex hormones, which means more people are starting to identify in different ways. So it's not a trend that the kids are following. It's actually the environment that we have created. Please keep an eye out for this research. I think it's really, really, really important research, and it's very, very compelling. But it's really only in the last couple of years that this research is coming out. And the same goes for developmental delays in children. Our own environment is creating this crisis. And as everyone who has had a child struggle knows, this needs to be addressed, and we need to put the right support structures in place for our societies as these challenges grow. I've always said the industrialization of food and the growth in diagnosis of issues like autism are tied firmly together, but I could never prove it. The science is now showing this is exactly what is happening. Big picture, long-term thinking is required here, and planning. So, rethinking food. The first and obvious place to start is, can you become vegan, if not vegan, vegetarian, or even reduce your meat by 75%? Are you up for the challenge? I hope you are. To reduce it by 75% with the least impact, it means red meat no more than once a month, and you can have chicken 4 times a month. The one thing I would definitely recommend is changes like this with families take time. So I got my family to agree with it, and for the last couple of years, we've been working really hard at it. I don't think we're at 75% meat reduction yet. I've got 2 growing boys who really don't want to go there. But we've got a huge selection now of vegetarian and vegan meals that the whole family enjoys. So we're getting there, and we keep working at it. Number 2, are you willing to boycott seafood? As I already said, we need to get the mega trawlers out of the ocean, but while there is still a market for these products, they will continue depleting the ocean of fish and crustaceans. If we give our oceans a chance to recover, which we saw happen during the pandemic, and it was a beautiful thing to see, we might be able to reduce the incredible heat records we're seeing this year, because more life in the ocean means more oxygen and less dead spots. Equally, with the amount of chemicals and plastics in our oceans and rivers, do we really want to continue eating contaminated food anyway? Number 3, a simple thing that we can all commit to: just don't buy anything air flown. This has the highest emissions of all food, so please make sure it's sourced as locally as possible. It's just as long as it's not flown, it is not making a massive contribution to emissions. And this is mainly because the shipping emissions were cleaned up at the beginning of the 20s. That's also one of the reasons we're seeing crazy heat extremes, because by cleaning up the pollution, there are less aerosols to reflect the heat back out into the atmosphere. But when it comes to food, local is always better when possible, but it's okay if it's shipped. Number 4, will you work hard to reduce the packaging of food? Excess packaging is the number 1 plastic waste, and I'm going to talk about that when I do the plastics and the waste section, which is coming up soon. So any way we can reduce it personally, we must try hard. Equally, if we can convince 1 billion people to join us in reducing their plastic packaging waste, we can really create some momentum. But it's really challenging. Farmers markets and often even the cheapest supermarkets typically have less packaging. But at this stage, we still all need to work really, really, really hard to find sustainable options. But the more of us who work hard, the greater the change we can drive. Also, as you discover things that are coming in more sustainable packaging, especially if it's not those really expensive shops that the majority of people can't afford, as you discover it, share it on social media, share it with your community, because what we need to be doing is making other people aware of what their options are. But regardless, at this point, the businesses aren't doing it, so we need to work harder to do our part. Number 5, please, can we all start avoiding takeaway and boycott the convenience culture? Oh, God, this is a one. It's a massive issue, and the pandemic made all of us so much more hooked on home delivery. Can we start going out again instead, or only eat in restaurants or cafes that have washable cups, bowls, plates, cutlery, glasses, and everything else? No, nothing plastic. Right? That's the most important thing. Nothing disposable, because it's not just plastic, it's all disposable items, because everything that is created requires energy to create. So even if it's a paper straw, it's still an unnecessary item, right? Another thing we can all look at doing is deleting food apps from our phones. And let's change this convenience culture, because it is destroying our environment. You hear of people getting a single cup of coffee or a single tub, those small tubs of Haagen-Dazs ice cream delivered to them. Really? We're that disconnected with the impact of our decisions on the environment? Come on, we can do better than that. And number 6, with 8% of food waste contributing to emissions overall, we need to tackle this broadly and at home. Composting, bokashi bins, reducing what we buy, smaller portions, just making sure we're not adding to the problem. Also, remember, make a commitment to no food waste in the bins. We need to get human methane down significantly. Everything helps, and the more of us that do it, the better. Let's put all organic waste back in the ground, and besides, it will help you grow your garden, which is important with food shortages and supply chain issues continuing to become worse. So being able to feed yourself will become important. It's going to become very, very important. Don't underestimate it. The one thing I'd strongly suggest is to stay open-minded. There are many other aspects I could include on food, so this is really just a flavour. I spent years looking to all aspects of this when my children were very young, mainly because one of them was having some behavioural issues. And the expertise in this area really is worth going deep on. The impact of our food, based on so many factors, is really something you can't imagine until you go deeper. And when you know, you really start to notice everything. However, for most, because we can't see it, you can't see what's on the skin of your apple, even if it's poisonous or a potential carcinogen. So we eat it. And even if we peel the apple, we know it's not going to get rid of it. But we can't see the chemicals and the microplastics in the food we eat. And as a result, as the years have gone on, we've just started to turn a blind eye, because what are we going to eat? What else can we do? It feels like everything contains poisons today. And that's a problem that we've got to tackle, right? But I have to say, how we allowed ourselves to get to this point is completely beyond me, because we've known about this for decades. This is not new. But here we are. And that means that we have a lot of work to do, and we have to stay open-minded, especially with the sort of foods that might be part of our future. So whether it's food made from insects, and I know that revolts so many people, but it's still a way of life in many parts of the world, plant-based food, lab-grown meat, or even rice infused with beef cells, like Korea has recently announced. When it comes down to it, if we're hungry, we will eat it. Another thing is, I've met many, many people in the amazing journey of my life that spent years in refugee camps as children, young adults, and as adults. There was a lot that struck me, but one of the things that really struck me is all of them were forced to eat bugs, like cockroaches, to stay alive. Food security is a massive risk that is only going to grow. And while we think only the poor will face this, we will all face this if the extreme weather events and biodiversity loss continues to get worse, and it will continue to get worse. So here's some recent headlines of food impacts, both what it is doing to us and the environment, as well as the regular crop failures we are hearing about all the time now. We have empty shelves here. We've had low stocks many times since the pandemic started, but recently it's not only more expensive, but less is available. For the poorest, it's even harder because they can't afford even the basics. Please, everyone, plan a garden. Work together as a community. If you live in an apartment complex, come together and plan a garden along with your composting. Let's come together and do this so you can sustain yourself when things get serious, because they are going to get serious. As NASA says in the article headline bottom left, within the next 10 years, we will see the impacts. However, remember, everything is happening faster than the scientists are predicting, so get ready now. We need to get to work and have large-scale plans to clean up our environment, land, air, and water. We need to look at some of the massive pollution issues created and work out how we can clean up our food, as well as the more permanent damage like forever chemicals everywhere. This is not something small. It's huge and it requires global attention and action. Make sure your elected officials know and get them moving. Support businesses doing good in the world and boycott those who refuse to address the problem. I would suggest that the fast food industry is worth boycotting, but I know my brother won't do it. All right, so thank you for checking in for the food and the fast food section. Hopefully you learned something today. I always learn something as I bring this data together. With this, I've really only touched the surface because there is so much more to cover, but I'm trying to bring together all of the critical pieces as well as to illustrate growth, so we can understand the scale of the problem, because when we understand the scale, we can also see it's the solution. If you want to join the journey, come and join me on my Facebook group, 1 billion people with uncommon courage. And the only thing I ask is to be respectful and to join the conversation. If anyone's horrible and ugly, they just get blocked straight away. Because I'm not a blocker, but I just haven't got any time for that. But let's come together and create a global community that's committed to action. That's what we need. 1 billion people acting and driving change can create the human tipping point we need. Once we reach 1 billion people, we'll need everyone to recruit 3 to 4 people each, and then we will be in a position to drive the runaway changes required. Believe we can do it, and let's get to work. See you next time for the section on fashion, which is obviously going to include fast fashion and lots of information to learn there. So I'll try and keep it nice and brief again, but thanks for being here. Leave a comment wherever you're watching this. I'd love to know what you think. The feedback gives me the confidence and it also gives me the motivation to keep going. So yeah, I'd love to hear from you. All right. Thanks, guys. See you soon. Uncommon courage should be every